Hi guys, hi again, it's Bob from The Guitar Show here, again still in isolation without Ramon, but he and I thought it would be quite a nice idea while he's doing a little series on the Blues Breakers for me to talk about my 1958 Sunburst Les Paul and my story with it. I hope you enjoy it. Let's start at the beginning, start with where I come from and my formative years and my taste in music. So I'm in my early 60s now. So in the mid-60s, I was a youngster and I was very aware, living in London at the time, of the British blues boom, the pop boom and the blues boom, led really by John Mayall and all his amazing guitar players. And that's really where I grew up. So the age of 12, 13, 14, really important years, that kind of stuff was going on, the first Led Zeppelin album, stuff like that. So the guitar players that influenced me at that time were obviously Eric Clapton, with John Mayall's Blues Breakers and the Beano album, but also songs like Stepping Out, for example, are really worth listening to on that. An amazing instrumental led by Clapton, full of fire. I can only imagine what it would have been like to see him play that at the Marquee or somewhere like that. It must have been incredible. But other bits of music I came across, Decca had a cheap LP series called The World of Blues Power. And Volume 2 had an otherwise unreleased song by Peter Green with Fleetwood Mac called Greenie, which completely captured my heart, and that was played on the Sunburst. Then there was Jimmy Page, obviously, in Led Zeppelin, and of course I thought he was playing a Sunburst because that's what all the photographs showed, but of course most of his best solos were on that lovely telly of his. Other people, Mick Taylor, also in John Mayall's band after Peter Green. Another fantastic violin-sounding Sunburst player, very restrained, fantastic guitar player. Paul Kossoff, full of fire, but I think my favourite work he did around that time was on their second album, the Quiet album, and in particular songs like Woman or Free Me, which really made me think I had to get a Gibson guitar with humbuckers for what I was doing. Now, the guitar I ended up with was a Gibson SG with T-tops, but I got my humbuckers. Now we know the difference. Back then we didn't know the difference. So, there was a cast of thousands apart from them, people like Duane Allman, Mike Bloomfield obviously leading the charge in the States. It was interesting though how the Brits seemed to take an American folk music in the early 60s and almost fold it back and give it back to America by the late 60s. It's a really interesting twist in the whole story of the electric blues. Another favourite guitar player of mine from that time, really obscure, he never gets a mention except on my videos, is a guy called Gary Green, who was the guitar player in Gentle Giant, who went on to be quite a mathematically based proggy band, but in their early days was still quite bluesy. And if you listen to their eponymous first album, there's a track called Why Not, which has got some really, really great blues playing on a Sunburst Les Paul on it. Many of these guys toggled with a Stratocaster as well, so they did both. Some of these guys I've got to know over time, people like Clem Clemson, who was in Colosseum for a while and was a very, very celebrated session player in the UK for many years. His first band was called Bakerloo, and they had this amazing slow blues called That Worried Feeling on a sampler record from Harvest Records, which was called Picnic. And I still listen to that track probably once every couple of weeks today. I think it's sublime guitar playing. He was very young at the time, fantastic player. And another friend of mine, Diesel Martin, who was in a band called Nose Dice in the 70s. And they had a fantastic anthem called Why Sugar that was a bit of a pastiche of another very famous rock and roll song with the word sugar in it. Big favourite, have a listen to that too. So I was going to play you some relevant extracts, but then I chopped my little finger rather badly gardening yesterday. In fact, it's a very bad cut. So I can't play a note, which means I'm going to spend the next week or so practicing my slide guitar playing because I can't play, I can't fret notes. Anyway, the Sunburst Les Paul was in my genes as a listener and as a guitar player, but for years I never owned a Les Paul. Never had one. Never found one that I liked. The truth was, I found them heavy and I found them all rather hard. That's because, of course, I wasn't looking for the real vintage deal at that point. I was looking for contemporary guitars and I just didn't think they were very good. So my 1961 Shoreline Gold Strat, which I acquired in 1975 for £180, and a collection of boutique guitars from the 80s like PRS, Tom Anderson, Steinberger, Brian Moore, were my staple guitars. Playing a lot of quite, 80s style music, quite a lot of production, quite a lot of effects, using rack amps and stuff like that. That was the way of the day. It was only really in the late 90s, once I had a home and a family kind of settled, that my thoughts returned to those old Les Pauls of yore. And in particular, I found myself thinking, I should buy one now. I'm going to look for a 57 or 58 gold top Les Paul with paths like Clem's or like Snowy White's, a few others. The first thing I had to do was I had to find and befriend a dealer who could expose me to as many vintage pieces as possible so I could get familiar, because I didn't have a lot of experience of playing these things and I wasn't going to go out and shell a lot of money out without some kind of familiarity and being conversant with what they offered and what was good and what wasn't so good. Now, you might have gathered from previous utterances of mine, I don't hold many dealers in particular high esteem, and sure enough at that time few were really interested in helping me. As usual, they were much too busy slagging off each other's inventory. Plus ça change. One was, I'll spare his blushes, but he gave me a lot of help and became a friend. And that way I got to meet a number of candidate and comparative instruments before committing myself. These included things like an extraordinary 58 Flying V that landed in the UK at £70,000 and changed hands twice in as many weeks, reaching almost £200,000. So somebody made a serious profit on that guitar. At the same time, Gary Moore was making his number 3 Les Paul, which was a 58 gold top with black plastic parts. It's not my favourite combination, but I know some of you out there like those. But that guitar, when I played it, it felt like it was strung with 12s or 13s. So it was a real man's guitar. It was way too much for me. Nevertheless, by now I was feeling confident enough to make a purchase. And the dealer turned up at my place on Sunday afternoon. In fact, he came into this very room I'm in now with this guitar. And knowing what the price relativities were even back in the day, my first reaction was, no way, man, no way we're going into Sunburst territory. But he persuaded me that this was a really great straight guitar at a sensible and fair price. And after thinking about it for quite a few days, thinking really hard, and I had to extend the mortgage to afford it, but he was right. And here we are, more than 20 years later, I'm still holding it. I have no intention of letting this go anywhere for a long time yet. And this baby soon taught me a lot about how different these instruments are from the later and modern ones that I'd never been struck by. They're a bit lighter, mainly because of evaporation and crystallization within the woods. They're also much brighter and much more resonant, even acoustically. They're much springier. Very, very few modern Les Pauls feel and sound anything like these. A lot of people have talked about the similarities between the Les Paul and a very old Telecaster, and I have to say I agree with them. They have a lot in common. They're both very light, very resonant guitars, not at all dark and thick like the classic pantomime Les Paul feel. The finishes are very, very brittle and very thin. To me, most modern ones, even the really expensive reissues, feel like they're wrapped in cling film. It's the only way I can describe it. I can usually tell one, unless it's an extraordinarily good fake, I can usually tell one because it just feels sticky. Okay, sorry, it's just my opinion. And the thing about these guitars, and you don't need me to tell you this, you just listen to the music that's recorded on them, they are expressive guitars. The reason that people seek out these guitars and want them is because they are expressive in a way that most other guitars simply aren't. Again, really early Telecasters fall right into that groove. So I could talk for days about the componentry and the pickups and the plastics and the tuners, but suffice to say for now that this one is all straight and it's really looked after me well. Which brings me to a sensitive bit that I did want to talk about. I hope you don't think I'm preaching. I know many people out there feel that instruments like this should only be in the hands of real musicians and not moneyed bankers, lawyers, whatever. The people like me, whatever that means, because you see my videos, but you really don't know me and you don't know who I am and how I think and what I'm about. But people like me shouldn't be hoarding all this good stuff. Well, yeah, this thing cost me a lot of money 20 years ago and is now worth quite a lot more than that. But I'd been dreaming of owning one for over 30 years and I'd saved quietly and assiduously towards that goal for the whole of that time, and that's a long time. I'm not made of money. I've worked long and hard for what I do have, but I admit to my share of good fortune, and I was born at a good time. But my message is that anyone can do what I've done if they really want to. I have no time for the trolls. Fortunately, they are few. So with that off my chest, maybe check out some of the recordings I've referred to in this video. I think we'll try and add a link to the end. See if you like them too. Some of them are a bit strange and most of them seem a bit dated, but there's some fantastic tones and some fantastic playing, and it's done on sunbursts. So in the meantime, please stay safe and stay home during these strange times. Until next time, cheers.